now listening to the Schuster Express on 1252 Sports Chicago. And now for your host, David Schuster.
Good evening and welcome into tonight's special podcast. I am David Schuster, and tonight we are going to pay tribute to a longtime friend who left us way too early. Les Grobstein was not only a peer and a cohort, but most importantly, he was a friend. Les passed away, unfortunately, on Sunday, and honestly, I'm still having a hard time even reciting those words because I, like everyone else, thought that Les would be here forever. Les was omnipresent, meaning he was everywhere. And I know that because I was usually right next to him. No matter what the venue was, whether it was Wrigley, Comiskey, the Cell, the old stadium, United Center, Soldier Field, didn't make any difference. All those press boxes, Les was either near or beside me. We worked together at Sports Phone, AM 1000, and The Score. We traveled together in a car to Milwaukee, St. Louis, Indianapolis, or Detroit. He was there with me when the Bears, the Bulls, the Hawks, the Cubs, or the White Sox were in the playoffs on the road. In fact, he was just everywhere. And when he wasn't there, the rare occasions, he was on the air talking to you about Chicago sports. He had an encyclopedia knowledge of sports. He was passionate about Chicago and Chicago radio. He did play-by-play on so many current and now defunct teams: the Rush, the Sting, the Bruisers, the Hustle, the Horizons, UIC hockey, basketball, and many more. He was the pride of Von Steuben and Columbia College, where he also taught some classes. Les was absolutely unique. He was a hard worker and at times an easy mark to have some fun with, but most of all, and this is the most important part, Les had a kind heart and a gentle soul, and that's what I'll always remember about Les. So tonight, I wanted to pay homage to his memory with stories galore, and I wish I could recite them all, but not even on a podcast can I tell some of them. And I reached out to many of mine and Les's friends to come on and talk about Les. These are the people who stood shoulder to shoulder with him in the field, and they are going to help me with all those stories. So we're going to bring them in one by one here on tonight's podcast to try and put a smile on our faces from really a sad, sad story with Les's passing. And we're going to have more than a laugh or two. I can promise you at that. So without further ado, let's bring in our very first guest. That is Kenny McReynolds. And Kenny, I was on your show earlier today. We certainly had some fun talking about Les there. Like I said, we can go on and on. Watch your mouth now, because there's some stories you can't. No, I'm teasing, of course. But go ahead. I'm going to let you be the leadoff hitter. You're the Ricky Henderson of tonight's podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me, David. One thing I want to let people know about Les, you're right. Les had a great heart. People don't realize that. A few years ago, when I was in the hospital and I got downgraded from serious to critical, Les was at a Notre Dame football game, and word got down to South Bend. I was on the critical list. I'm laying in my bedroom in the hospital. In rushes Les. I said, Les, what are you doing here? He said, well, I heard you were really sick. I had to see you. And I mean, I'll never forget that. He had a great heart. Les was a teacher of mine at Columbia College. He was the first person that told me I could make it into broadcasting. I said, I don't know if I can do that or not. He said, yeah, you can. He gave me an A in his class. I'm glad you brought up Les's play-by-play. I was a color commentator for UIC basketball. Grobstein on the radio, to me, in my opinion, is better than a lot of NBA play-by-play guys. Les is an unbelievable play-by-play guy. I mean, he's unbelievable good. I could go on all day, David, but my favorite Grobstein story, we're doing UIC at Wright State in Dayton, Ohio. We were doing a radio, but they decided they wanted to do a TV broadcast. So we were going to simulcast it, which means we had to wear a suit. So I get to the airport, I meet Les, I got a duffel bag and a suitcase. We go on the airplane, I don't think anything about it. We get off the airplane, we get in the car. Les knows every street in Dayton, Ohio. How, I don't know, but he did. So we get to the hotel and we check in, and Les just has a little bag that you can put like a laptop in. I got a big bag. I got my duffel bag with my fancy suit. Les, I just thought about this. You forgot to get your suit from the airport. He said, no. I didn't forget. Les, where's your suit? He holds up the bag. It's in here. He folded up his suit and threw it in like a bag that would fit a laptop in. And but that was Les. He's like, it's in here. I think I laughed for like 45 minutes. I couldn't believe it. But he had a great heart. He was a talented person, great brain. I'll miss him dearly. And I know a lot of other people want to come on, David. So I want to thank you for letting me be part of this. And I saw Les at the last Bears home game. He didn't look well then.
Yeah.
I offered to drive him home. We left together. I said, Les, you want me to drive you home? You don't look well. He said, Kenny, I'm okay. And I tell you what, I didn't know if that was the last time I was going to see him. I wish I told him I loved him, but I told him to call me when he got home because I was worried about him then. He didn't look well. And there will never be another Les Grobstein.
No, he was one of a kind. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And so are you, Kenny. And I greatly, greatly appreciate you leading us off tonight. You not only got a base hit to right field, you stole second, third, and home. You're the Jackie Robinson tonight of tonight's podcast.
All right. Hey, thanks. And I'll be watching all night. I know other people want to get on and talk about the great Les Grobstein. Thanks so much for having me, David.
Thank you, Kenny. Much appreciated. All right, so let's go from Kenny and let's bring in someone who's even prettier than Kenny. And that, of course, is Cheryl Ray, who also has stood shoulder to shoulder with Les and myself for many, many years covering sports. Cheryl, good evening, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for asking me. This is kind of heartbreaking, but a good thing to do, kind of cathartic for us to go through this.
Well, give me some memories of, there's so many, Cheryl. We could do this all night and all tomorrow and all the rest of the week, to be honest with you. But go ahead, lead us away.
God, there's so many. We worked together at AM 1000, so that was always fun because he was the overnight guy, and he would have me come on. My favorite would be coming on from Platteville at 1 o'clock in the morning. He'd say, "Sure, you got to come on the air." He'd have me on the air for over an hour. But you know what? It was great. It was great because the report back and forth, he knew everything. And what I was amazed with is that he didn't have any notes. He sat there on the air from anywhere from 4 to 6 hours without a note. He did this all from his memory. And I'm like, I said, I would like to delve into your head, find your brain, and where do you keep all this stuff? Is there a file cabinet up there, something like that? But one of the things about him, and I loved him dearly because he did not have a mean bone in his body. He was kind, he was generous. And when I was doing what I was doing, when I was starting in the early 80s, he was the least sexist person that I dealt with. And from what I had to go through with other people, he made things easy for me when I worked with him. But one of my favorite memories is when we were at Jordan's last game as a Bull. And that would be the last championship. And we were in Utah. And since it was a game 6, he and I both had tickets for after game 7. But back then, remember, Les had all those vouchers for his free miles and stuff like that. So he said, he had arranged for his flight to be changed for an earlier flight. And he was going to go from Salt Lake City to San Francisco, and then from San Francisco to Chicago. My flight was going to be really late in the day. So, and because Les never had a hotel room, I let him stay in my hotel room so we could go to the airport together to go get our flights. And he had the flight, the earlier flight, and United Airlines said, "Hey, can somebody give up a flight to San Francisco because we're overbooked?" Les, the way he can make things happen, he goes up to the desk. He goes, and he says, "Sure, come with me." I'm like, "Why would I come with you?" He says, "Come with me." And he goes to the woman. He says, "I will give up my seat." He's holding the ticket. "I will give up my seat if you would give what you're offering to her and me on the next flight to Chicago." And lo and behold, he got us each $700 plus the flight to Chicago, which only left an hour later, direct first class. I was like, how do you do this?
You know what, Cheryl? He first of all, he had, what's the movie Up in the Air where George Clooney's got 1 million miles? Les had 10 million miles. Les could have flown to Pluto for free. I mean, he first of all, he memorized every airline number. He taught me how to be a good reporter, how to find discounts and freebies. I mean, Les was the master. He flew around the country, and I don't think he spent a dime. I don't know how he did it.
I don't know. And the thing is, that banner back there was from that night. And I thought I had outdid him when I got him. I got $10 to give to the worker at the at the Utah arena. I said, hey, give me a banner for $10. And then I go, wait, give me 2 for 20. And I gave one to Les. Here I'm thinking I'm outdoing Les, and he outdoes me $700 an earlier flight plus first class.
Don't worry, he made a little profit on that banner. I can promise you that. Hey, Cheryl, I appreciate you joining us. Very kind of you. I mean, again, we could do this all day and all night, of course, but I want to get some other people in. God bless you for chiming in.
Thank you for allowing me to be here. I appreciate it very much.
From Cheryl, we're going to go now to one of the voices that I enjoyed working with at the Score for many years. Let's just bring in Danny Mac. Dan McNeil is now joining us. Hey, Danny, thanks for joining us, buddy.
Hello, David. It's good to be with you despite the circumstances, and I enjoyed hearing Cheryl's story, and I've enjoyed hearing a lot of people reflect on their fond memories with a guy who was truly one of a kind, and it was shocking news yesterday and just very, very sad.
Very sad, but you know what? They always say, remember the good times, and that's what we're trying to do here tonight. And you couldn't be more right. I mean, I don't know if there's another synonym for unique, one of a kind, but I mean, they broke the mold with Les. I mean, Les, first of all, Danny, you did shows for so many years, a lot of times with partners. Les would do not only a 5-hour show sometimes, Danny, but when those Cub games ended on the East Coast, he would do 9 hours or 8-hour shows. I don't know how he did it, because I would fill in for him once in a great moon, and it was your voice actually hurt after a while. Les could just go on and on and on.
Yeah, I tried 6 hours briefly when I was auditioning at ESPN in Bristol, and that was with a partner, and that was daunting. I can't imagine, really, and when you think about this era, doing more than 3 is just kind of stupid, because people want the quick hits. They want podcasts like yours. They want the soundbite on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram in less than 2 minutes. So that certainly has changed. But, when I started working full-time at the Loop in '88, Les put his arm around me and big brothered me in a way I'll never forget. He was the only guy in town in radio who knew hockey. And hockey was my passion as a younger man, as you remember, and I covered a lot of Blackhawks games. And we were in St. Louis in '89 for a playoff game, and I had no credit card because my credit was horrible. I had $100 on me. And after the Hawks and Blues played, Les took me to a hotel, and I said, make sure I get in before you take off. And he had plans. He wanted to go do something. I think a woman was involved, and he was waiting in the car, and I run back out to the car after they wouldn't take me, and I said, just take me to the airport. I'll just sleep at Lambert. I've got an early flight tomorrow. It was rock and roll. I didn't care. I was covering the Hawks in the playoffs, right? He drove me around St. Louis until we found a hotel that would take me with my $100 bill. And no credit card for the deposit. And that's just how he was. He was a sweetheart. And, Matt Spiegel and I enjoying the Blackhawks 2010 Cup with him in Philadelphia. The three of us were standing together when the puck went in, and none of us saw the puck go in. And it just, growing up listening to Les in 7th and 8th grade when he was reporting on WLS, it was just so much fun to experience some of those things with him.
Yeah, and he talks all that time about how him and Spiegs were sitting up in the rafters when they scored that winning goal by Patrick Kane. I was in the hallway because they ushered us all off the ice, and then none of us saw the damn thing go in. That's a great experience. And Les was always on the road back in 13 when they won in Boston. He was there with me as well. And then, of course, in 15 when they won on home ice. Hey, Danny, I greatly appreciate you taking some time and joining us tonight. I hope to see you soon on the golf course or on a lake with some muskie underneath us somewhere.
That'd be wonderful, David. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you much. All right, that's Danny McGill. Appreciate that. Let's go now to a person who actually Les helped get into the industry and who I've worked with numerous times. I've always loved working with Steve Ulkan. Let's bring in Steve right now. Hey, Steve.
David, great to see you. Boy, great to see Danny and Cheryl. I'm like going back in a time warp here with the radio legends. It's awesome. But thank you for inviting me. I appreciate that. And in Les's honor tonight, I am wearing the official WLS 89ers jersey that I got.
And it still fits.
It's a little tight, but not bad. I was just absolutely floored. I was shocked when I got the news Sunday night about Les's passing. I go back 1981. I was a sophomore at Northern Illinois University, and Les's sister Holly was a little sister in my fraternity at NIU. And, obviously I was studying broadcasting, and here I am with Les Grobstein's sister. And of course, I grew up listening to Les and Larry Lou Jack and Tommy Edwards and everybody. And I'm like, God, I got to make the connection here, So I go to Holly and I said, is there any chance you could introduce me to your brother? And, just want to talk to him about broadcasting. And she did. And Holly's great, and certainly my condolences to Holly and everyone in the Grobstein family. So we made that connection, and Les got my foot in the door, and he helped me get an internship at WLS in 1981, the summer of 81. And I got to shadow Les a little bit at games. And I'm like, here I'm in the press box at Wrigley Field. I was going out of my mind. And I worked in other departments at the station. It was a great summer. And from there, Les and I became friends, and I was a part of the WLS 89ers and part with you at the Chicago Radio All-Stars. But, and I know George Hoffman told this story the other day. Matter of fact, I got so many texts the other day saying, hey, George just talked about you on the radio. I played on the team, but Les would every once in a while ask me if I would umpire, a game or two. And he paid me like $20 or $25. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I'll do that for $25. I'll umpire the game. I'd rather play, but sure, I'll umpire. And there's one game, and God, if Les was here, he could tell you the day, the time, who we played against, what the score was, and what inning it was when Les started arguing with me during the game. And I do forget if it was a base call or a balls and strikes call. But he comes out of the dugout, he starts arguing with me. And I'm like, whoa, Les, hang on, go back to the dugout. No, he starts, he's like Leo DeRocher all of a sudden, right? And he's going back and forth and bobbing his head like Earl Weaver or somebody. And I'm like, Les, that's enough. That's it. You got to stop. And he wouldn't stop. And that's it. I kicked him out of the game. And he said, you can't kick me out of this. This is my game. I said, no, it's not. I am the umpire. You're paying me. You are out. And that's it. He goes storming off the field. Oh, and that's it. He left the game. So, oh my God.
Steve, I got to tell you, that was not the only game he got kicked out of. We were playing a game, a real quick story. We were playing a game, Chicago Radio All-Stars, and I don't know who we were playing. It was at the Lou Boudreau Field in Harvey, Illinois.
Oh, I remember that. Yep.
And it was a doubleheader, and I don't know if it was the first or second game, whatever. And he was mouthing off because I think he had Leo DeRocher in his head, to be honest with you. And he got kicked out. And this is one of those charity games for the POWs or something like that. And oh my God, I wanted to shrink into the ground, to be honest with you, but it was part of who he was.
It was.
I mean, he wasn't the greatest athlete, although he tried. I give him all the credit in the world.
He did, no
but
doubt.
He got so into it, and he saw so many people, managers like, who are some of the great managers who had, Lou Piniella, for instance, who would go crazy throwing a base or something like that.
Waving his arms and bobbing and weaving and just like, God.
And he did that. But, he also organized a lot of games for both, the WLS 89ers and for Crass. There was a time he actually organized the game for us to go to Kansas City for 3 days, a whole free trip. And it was sponsored by the defunct Braniff Airlines, long gone now. And we went to Kansas City, and it rained for 72 hours. It was Noah's Ark. It never stopped raining. And, we never played the game because it just never stopped raining. And most of us, we went down into the bar and we got inebriated. And unless, no alcohol will ever pass my lips ever.
Nope, ever.
He went to Royal Stadium in the rain. In the first ever game rained out at Royal Stadium, but he had to go to Royal Stadium. That's who Les was at the time and always was. Anyway, those are just great, great memories.
Yeah. And working in the press box with you guys all these years. And the one thing I always admired about Les that I could never do after a game, we did these voicers, right? You just do a 30, 35-second recap of the game. You didn't have to put tape in it or anything. Les would do it in one take. I could not remember if he ever just picked up the phone and all of a sudden does a 30-second recap of the game, no notes, no nothing, and boom, there it is, and he'd go running down to the locker room. It's just, he was an amazing man, and there's no doubt, we're all going to miss him so much, and it's just so heartbreaking, but it is fun to come on and talk about it and, celebrate his life, and that's what you have to do.
100%.
So I appreciate you having me on, David.
Oh, thanks a lot, Steve. And I hope to see you also on the golf course
as
soon as it gets warm in about 5 months.
Yeah, that'd be great. You, me, and Danny Mac. Let's go play.
Oh, that sounds like fun. Hey, Steve, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay. All right. Next up on the hit parade here, let's see. I think we got Mike Esposito. Let's bring in Mike Esposito now if we can. Mike, of course, also worked along both myself and Les and at the Score and out in the field. And Mike, I really appreciate it. Listen, now that you're right next to me on the screen, I feel like we're just about to do a show, and we are.
That's right. We've done how many different holiday shows?
Mr. Holiday.
If it was a holiday between 2010 and 2020, and you and I likely did a show on that day. So it was all in good fun, though. And thanks for having me on, David, to talk about Les. It certainly was very surprising to hear the news yesterday when it came across, but it's been fun. Once you get over the suddenness and the sadness of the loss, it has certainly been fun reliving a lot of these stories. And I got to tell you, there have been times over the last day that I have just, been so tickled by some of the things that come up. And a lot of the stories we've heard before, some of them we've never heard before. Ulkan had me going with the umpire story, throwing him out of the game. That's fantastic. But really, I'd like to start my intro to Les. I'm a little bit younger than you guys, not a ton younger, but a little bit younger than you guys. So my first Les experience was as a listener, right? I graduated college in the mid-90s. I was trying to get into this business. I was working in various different places, bartending, you name it. But I would get out of work late at night / early in the morning. And that was my intro to Les as a listener. And I loved it was, everything that we talked about. I did a shift last night talking about Les on the station. And, tons of people called up and said the exact same thing that I'm about to say, is that he was your pal in the car when you were either driving home or coming to work or whatever it was. At the time, I was going home from my bar job, and I loved sports. I was trying to break into radio. And that was my intro to Les. So then when I met him, and I told this story yesterday too, but this is great. One of the first things as I met you guys, and I met you all at the same time in the press box at Wrigley Field, because I started during the summer. It was baseball season. One of my first assignments, Wrigley Field press box. I have no idea who the Cubs were playing, but this would have been the late 90s, somewhere in there. And you guys were all there, and it was wonderful to meet all you guys who would become good friends from there on. But, talking to Les, he asked me for my birthday. So I told him my birthday. And he's like, no. I want the year too. Okay. So I give him the day, month, day, year. Les then proceeds to tell me what the Cubs did on that exact day, who the winning pitcher was, who the losing pitcher was, whatever. I had to look it up again last night. But, Bill Hands of the Cubs was defeated by Juan Marichal of the Giants, and, whoever hit a home run and whatever. But those two things were my introduction to Les.
Mike, the movie Rain Man with Dustin
Sure.
Hoffman and Tom Cruise. They patterned the Dustin Hoffman character in a way after Les. He was Rain Man. He could just come up with these facts and figures from, obscure days in the past. It was unbelievable.
I thought he was kidding. I really did. I thought he was kidding. I'm like, there's no way this guy knows what the Cubs did on my birth date, which was at the time, 25, 27, whatever, however many years ago it was. But he did, and he knew it. And it's just amazing. But some of the most fun stuff, and you and I mean, we sat next to each other in press boxes along with Les and the other Radio Row peeps, who a lot of whom we've seen on here tonight. Just so much fun, the banter, the stories, the jokes, sometimes at his expense, sometimes at our expense, the ball bounced around and whatever. But that to me, still to this day, is the most fun, as tedious as some of those baseball games would get, and rain delays and pitching changes and whatever. We always had the banter, the jokes, and the camaraderie, which was really is really for me the fun part. And
George Hoffman's going to come up in just a minute here also, Mike, and you were sort of you were in between me and Les at all those Bear games for years.
Oh my God!
Listen, watching the Bears was nauseous enough to begin with, to be honest with you. So we had to take our mind off what was going on down on the field. And I mean, Les and I would go back and forth. It was like badminton, back. And it was sort of like shooting fish in a barrel more often than not, in our tay-to-tays, but it was all in good nature. And I always have to keep getting back to the fact that, we had fun. I mean, if you can't tease your friends, you can't tease anybody. That's the way I always looked at it. And George actually taught me that a long time ago also. But it was just fun to do. I mean, it was just fun. I looked forward to those Sundays at Bear games, read the newspaper at 9, do whatever until the game started, and then basically go tay-to-tay with Les for 3 hours.
Well, and when the Bears minimized our parking accommodations so that you and I would have to meet up and then drive together because they only gave us one pass, but we were two people coming from two different spots, there were multiple times where if you had to go somewhere else, Les would give me a lift back to my car.
Right.
And that's how I was telling the story yesterday on the air about Les's car, which was the rolling sports almanac, right? I mean, and you've been in it many times. I mean, it was very lived in, lots of useful information to be found in that car, undoubtedly. But that speaks to the other thing you were saying, right? A kind soul, a good guy, a great friend. And we certainly, we did the whole Cutler era of Bears football, telling lots and lots of jokes in that press box. That's for sure.
It was a good way of forgetting a lot of those games. And you use the term lived in car. Actually, I considered his car a file cabinet on wheels because you couldn't even find a place to sit. There was a media guide here. There was a yearbook there, whatever. There was no place to sit in his car. Hey, Mike, I appreciate you joining us. Very kind of you to do so. I miss you, buddy. And I hope to see you somewhere soon.
Miss you too, David. We'll talk to you soon, man. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. All right, let's bring in now another person who actually, I think, knows Les even longer than I did, because George started at Sports Phone. George Hoffman is now going to be brought in. And George started at Sports Phone. He actually got me into Sports Phone, and I think you followed right after Les a few months after the fact. Is that right, George?
Yeah, I think it began in November of 77, and then I was taken through the ropes on Christmas Eve of that year by, of all people, Fred Hubner, who I hope we'll hear from later in this. By the way, Les had a lot of sayings. Will somebody please tell me why he always said, "You free days"?
I don't know.
Where did that come from?
Yeah, he did say that. I don't know if he got that from a cartoon. And, George, as I've probably told a bunch of stories over the last couple of days, I first met Les at Sports Phone. I was the green rookie at the time walking in. And my first impression was Les had his feet up on the desk and he was watching Woody Woodpecker.
And the Three Stooges.
Yeah, or the Munsters, which were all some of my favorites too. So I sort of gravitated towards Les, to be honest with you. But he had a childlike persona, which served him well in a lot of ways. And, what can you say? I mean, we could do this all night. Do you have any special memories with Les?
Well, first of all, I'm glad to have Steve Ulkan on because I didn't remember that when he threw Les out, Les eventually left. I thought Les stayed. So I'm glad that Steve told that story, which is a really great story. I don't know if people know this, but Les had a very interesting wardrobe. It's the only wardrobe that was rejected by the Salvation Army. It was just remarkable. He would come to games in the winter, the dead of winter, in a short sleeve summer shirt.
Right.
I'm thinking about Les, it's winter because I like this shirt. I just couldn't understand that. What I remember, obviously, was the Lee Elia tirade. You were there. I was there. I wasn't in the locker room because I was covering the Dodgers, and I'm not sure, David. I believe that was the last year before the Cubs changed to the locker room. Their locker room was down one line, right? It was down
the better of the bad,
line.
the better of the bad locker rooms is
it
what
was
you're
a
trying to say.
tiny little locker room, and the Dodgers were upstairs. Anyhow,
Right.
I come upstairs, and I'm about to give Les some tape, and Les says, "You won't believe what Lelia said." Well, I couldn't believe what Lelia said. And I was a freelancer back then. That's how I made my living. Les did some freelancing. He did a whole bunch of stuff. And he gave me that audio. And I made a lot of money off that audio, which was great. But that's how we shared. You talked about how many games you sat next to. I mean, I sat next to him and Red Motlow at Wrigley Field when we used to be able to sit in the first row of the press box. And it was every day was the same thing. And, even Red, who, Red was stern.
Yeah.
But he would laugh his head off because we would just make jokes with Les all the time. It was amazing. I figured I probably spent 2,000 games sitting next to him. So you were probably close to that. And at Soldier Field was the epitome of everything. Because, I came to some games, you went to a lot of games. When I was there, and Les is on one side, and Les would speak. Les is the only person that I know that when he tried to be funny, he wasn't funny. But when he wasn't trying to be funny, he was hysterical. It was remarkable.
You know what, George? I almost wanted to give him a quarter, maybe once, whenever he would say something funny, because he was not funny.
No, he was not funny, but he was funny. Isn't that great? Look, he truly epitomizes the term one of a kind.
Yeah.
I don't know if any other markets in our country have somebody like Les. Maybe they do, but not quite like him. And he was, in fact, a savant. He should have been on 60 Minutes when they occasionally would feature these, savants. Well, Les was one of those who could remember everything. He was Rain Man. And it was remarkable that he could do that. You didn't even have to ask him anything. He would start to jabber that this statistic and this statistic, and you'd look it up going, holy crap, he's right. Who is this guy? Anyhow, yes, I've known him for 44 years. He's a remarkable individual. I'm so glad to hear all these people tonight, from Kenny McReynolds, wonderful stories, and Cheryl Ray Stout, and now Espo, and I'm sure there are other people coming up. But this is the best way to remember anybody, is to remember the good side and to have some laughs. Unless you are providing those laughs now, and you will provide them for many years to come. Thank you for being alive.
Yeah, and thank you for being part of this, George. And you know what? That is absolutely true. I mean, there's a lot of people who cross your path in your life that you will never, ever forget. No one's going to forget Les.
No
one's going to forget.
He's an unforgettable soul.
100%. Hey, thanks for joining us, George. Greatly appreciate it.
Always.
Okay. All right. Next up on the hit parade, and this is a hit parade, by the way, let's bring in Fred Mitchell, who also was shoulder to shoulder with Les in press boxes and myself over all these years. Fred, thanks for taking some time out tonight.
Okay. Thank you, David, for having me. I missed the press room and press box banter we had when I was working full time for the Chicago Tribune, and it's good to see all of you guys. So many tremendous memories, just like what some of the other previous people have mentioned. One thing that comes to mind for me is that I prided myself on being pretty versatile. I was the only person in the history of the Tribune Sports to cover as a main assignment the Bears and the Cubs and the Bulls. But then everywhere I would pop up, there would be Les, and that would also include maybe a high school football or basketball game or UIC game, Northwestern, on and on and on. You wondered how he was able to do that. And not only was he there, but he was able to provide what I tell my students now at DePaul, that nugget of information that you didn't know before. So he would always give you something that would make you say, I didn't know that. And that, spoke to his love and passion for all sports, and his ability to get the most out of people that he interviewed. That was a special quality of his. I remember, going back 40 years, I remember when they used to have the softball game at Wrigley Field between the print against the electronic media, right? And Les was so aggressive and intense, and took it so seriously. I want to say that he might have broken an ankle, literally.
He did.
Trying to break up a double play.
He did.
In a softball game, like a 3-inning softball game. I think there's so many things I remember with regard to that. Another personal memory, which I've shared on Facebook already, was in 1991, we were covering the Bears preseason game over in Berlin, Germany. And so we spent 7-8 days there. And the day before the game, we'd gotten all our written work done, and I had to rent a car. And Les talked me into going to Poland, because 2 years earlier the Berlin Wall had come down, and he said, "Let's go to this guy." Oh, okay, all right. So we go on the Autobahn, and he's urging me to go 120 miles an hour, and between East and West Germany, they still had the border patrol people. They wanted to check us to see, get our identification or whatever. And I obliged, and just before taking off, Les rolls the window down and starts yelling out some profanities at the armed soldiers. And I said, "Les, what are you doing?" So I sped off as fast as I could before we got stopped. But we had a nice meal at a small, obscure restaurant in Poland, and I had shared a couple pictures of that, and we talked about that years later, how nice that was to be able to do that.
I'm sort of scared, Fred, he might have almost caused an international incident, or it could also have been like the scene in the movie Stripes where they go across the border and they almost get arrested, or whatever happened in that.
Yeah.
I mean, Les could, mouth off it sometimes, and I go, "Les, calm down.
Exactly. Yeah. That was, but his, people have talked already about his passion, his love of sports, his desire to be wherever the action was, whatever it took to get there. He'd use his miles, like someone said previously. But I remember covering a Bears game, I believe it was in Dallas, and we were staying at a 5-star hotel with the team. And I remember the next morning coming down, and Les was on the couch there in the lobby, and it's like, okay, I'm not going to ask any questions, but it was clear that that's where he spent the night, and he probably spent the night in some in the car on some road trips. I wouldn't be surprised with that either, but that wasn't important to him. The most important thing was to be where the action was and where the big story was.
Yeah.
And all the stories that I'm hearing now, I think are a lesson for all of us, that at the end of the day, people are going to remember how you made them feel, right? And I don't care about how many accolades or awards you have and all these things that are nice to be said about you after you pass away. People are going to remember, did this person treat me well? Did they make me laugh? And Les checks all the boxes when it comes to that. So
no question.
I'm so grateful that I got to know him, and that he touched so many lives in a positive way.
Well said, Fred. Hey, greatly appreciate you taking some time tonight. I miss you also out in the field, and I hope to run into you sometime soon.
Same here. Thank you, Dave.
All right, thanks. That's Fred Mitchell, who used to write many articles, and he's right. He was a Cubs beat reporter. He covered the Bears. He covered everybody, and I used to love standing shoulder to shoulder with him in press boxes also. All right, let's bring in somebody who's down in the great state of Texas. Let's bring in Michael Golnick now. And Mike, of course, was an intern. Hey, Mike, I haven't seen you in a while. Good to see you. Mike was an intern. I remember, Mike, you were shadowing Les when he was working at a WLS. And I mean, you could start right there and go forward. Go ahead, Mike. Good to see you.
I basically owe my career to Les. But first, David, it is so wonderful to see you and all these other people that I had the honor and privilege to call colleagues back when I was green as a cucumber. And Les was the guy that got the ball rolling. I went to Columbia College, and he was one of my teachers, and we hit it off. And he hired me as an intern. I didn't realize that I followed in the prestigious footsteps of Steve Ulkan, but I was an intern at WLS. And, you know, the thing that I remember about those days is, again, I felt like just a kid. I was just getting acclimated. I was bugging you and George, I think, on a nightly basis with equipment issues. And I remember it was 1988. I think it was a Wednesday, and Les called me out of the blue, and he said, "Hey, Mike, what are you doing this weekend?" And I said, I don't know, nothing, I guess. And he said, "You want to go to LA for games 1 and 2 of the World Series?"
Oh.
And I said, okay. And this was the first major event that I had ever covered. And so I went out there, had no idea what was going on, surrounded by media from all over the globe. And game 1 turned out to be the one where Kirk Gibson hit his historic game-winning walk-off, if you could call it that. He couldn't walk, home run. And experiences like that are priceless, David. I mean, God willing, if I live to be 100, I'll never forget how I felt being at that game. And just a few years later, I was a little bit, more situated into my career, but the same thing. Called me, I think midweek, and said, "Do you want to go to the Super Bowl in Atlanta?" And sure enough, I did. And I saw the Cowboys beat up on the Bills, and I think that's where I developed my intense dislike of the Cowboys, which puts me in an awkward spot, being that I live in Dallas, and Cowboy fans are really upset right now.
Yeah, too bad.
It's just stuff like that. I mean, I don't know what to say outside of the fact that none of this would have happened without him. And, he was just an extraordinarily nice man. I mean, everybody's talked about his encyclopedic memory and how he could come up with things. And there's no question about that. But you know what? Above it all, he was just an incredibly nice man.
He really was.
And he made it easy for me when I made mistakes at the beginning, and I made a lot. He understood. If I didn't get him the exact tape that he wanted, he understood. I did give him one instance to thoroughly laugh at me, and that was when he sent me to Milwaukee to cover the Packers and Vikings. And, this was obviously before the days of the internet when you could look up what somebody looks like. I didn't know who a lot of these guys were. I mean, I knew Brett Favre, all that, but I didn't know a lot of those guys. I don't like the Packers. And so Packers win the game. I go down to the Packers locker room, and I see a guy surrounded. I thought he was one of the wide receivers. I go up to him, and I get brave, and I ask this question. It seems like you and Favre are always on the same page. You always seem to know where each other is on the field. And the guy looked at me and he said, "Yeah, that's because I'm on defense." And I told Les that story, and I think it was the hardest I had ever seen him laugh, at least around me. So I was honored to be at the expense of that. But David, I just want to echo what everybody else has said. This was a guy that he was a fan. He never thought of himself as a radio star or anything like that. He was a fan, and I loved listening to him. And the last time I had the pleasure of associating with him was it was after an unfortunate event. My son and I took the 3-hour drive down to Houston to see the Cubs play the Astros a couple years ago. And it was the night that Albert Almora hit the foul ball that hit that little girl.
Yeah.
And we just happened to be driving in the middle of nowhere, which is pretty much everywhere in Texas. And I decided to listen and tuned in to him. And I heard him talking about this. And I called in and he said, you know, we've got some information from our good friend, Michael Gulnick. And that touched me for two reasons. One is because he referred to me as his good friend. And two, because I think it was the first time my name's been mentioned in Chicago radio at that point for about 15 years. Just wonderful, David. I just, what can I say? I owe the man pretty much everything in terms of my radio career.
Hey, Mike, greatly appreciate you joining us. I miss you up here in Chicago. I know you're doing well down in the Lone Star State. Keep rooting against those Cowboys. It's cathartic. It is.
It really is. And David, we are getting a Portillo's sometime this year, about 15 minutes away from my house. That's maybe the only reason to stay in Texas. But no, I miss you guys. I miss Chicago terribly. And thanks so much for what you're doing. It just means the world.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Much appreciated. Hope to see you soon. All right, let's go now from Dallas. Let's go to Tampa Bay. Let's go to where it's even warmer in the great state, the sunshine state of Florida, and bring in our good buddy Dave Wills. He's the voice of the Tampa Bay Rays, but he's a Chicagoan through and through. Hey, Dave, it's good to have you here tonight.
David, it's great. And thanks for having me. And again, as Danny Mack said earlier, it's under very unfortunate circumstances. And, you know, we talk about Les, and we've heard all the great stories. I mean, the guy was a caricature. The guy was at times easy to kind of laugh at or laugh with. And but all I can think about is when I think about Les Grobstein, I think about a guy that as an 8th and 9th grader in graduating from McDonald School in Oak Lawn, and Lou Canales and I are going to grammar school together and going on to high school together, and we're listening to Larry Lujak and Tommy Edwards in the mornings, and we hear this Les Grobstein doing sports, and we're just thinking to each other, that's what we want to be. We want to be Les Grobstein. And then to be able to go out and work at Sports Phone and to take a phone call every once in a while from Les getting ready to send you some sound from some event that he was at, some obscure event that I don't know why we're taking sound from, but Les is like, hey, this is Les. Oh, hi, Dave. And I'm doing my Chris Farley right now. I'm talking to Les Grobstein. It's kind of, and then I worked with him when I was kind of trying to figure out my way. I was the PR director, media relations director of the communications director of the Chicago Bruisers. He was our play-by-play guy. And as we've heard many, many times from, Kenny and George and Steve Ulkan, those guys, he was a fan. He was. I mean, he wasn't just collecting a paycheck. He was a fan of the Chicago Bruisers. You listened to the game, and he gave you passion and really called the game every game was the Arena Bowl. And then I worked with him. I was able to do some games with him as the color commentator for the UIC hockey team. And you talk about great stories. And I listened to your podcast yesterday with George, and talking about the depending on how the wind blows and depending on how the cafeteria was set up. I just remember him coming into like the media dining area, which was again a little archaic at times at UIC, but he'd grab like 2 of these, and I'm thinking, this is the thirstiest guy in the world. How in the world are you going to drink 2 liters in a broadcast? And yet it would be like this much done by the end of the game, and then he'd take the other one home with him, along with 16 potato chips and a couple of sandwiches. But,
Dave, he wasn't the thirstiest. He was the cheapest. So he made sure that he went home with everything.
So, I just, like I said yesterday, I mean, to get a chance to work with him. And then I remember him coming in, and you guys were talking with Cheryl about his airline miles. And I know there's a couple guys waiting, gals. I'll try and be quick, but I was the communications director of the Kane County Cougars for a few years, and then obviously became the play-by-play announcer. But he was angling to try to become the play-by-play guy. And I remember having a meeting with him and our GM at the time, Bill Larson. And he came into our offices, and he's like, all right, Bill, I looked at your schedule, and I know you play in Cedar Falls and Cedar Rapids, and you play in Waterloo, and you play over in Clinton. And he goes, I could fly on Midway Airlines. I've got all these miles. I can go to this place. I can go to that place. I can go to this place. I can bounce around. I could easily get around the Midwest League and be able to call these games. And I just remember our GM going, "We're just expecting you to be on the team bus. That's it," And obviously, I mean, unfortunately for Les, fortunately for me, I hate to say this, I ended up later on getting the job, but just again, the things I did with Les and being around him. And I heard Kenny earlier at the very, very beginning talk about him doing play-by-play for basketball, and then he did it for hockey too. And he's right. Les was a really, really good play-by-play announcer. He really knew all the nuances of being a very good play-by-play announcer. And I think that, again, for lack of a better term, if he was a little more polished, maybe off the mic, he probably would have been a big league announcer somewhere. I think he was that good. I really do.
Yeah. I mean, he honestly, Dave, he could walk in with two teams he had no knowledge of. He could take a look at the sheets. This was his Rain Man quality about him. He could just scan them over real quickly. Game would start, and it's like he knew these guys by the back of his hand.
Yeah, and again, just a couple other quick things. Just thinking about the stuff that he talked about. I mean, the Chicago Radio All Stars. I was, the came on Sports Phone and started to play and had a blast playing with you guys. I mean, it was really the highlight of the week was being able to go somewhere to Waveland Avenue and play our games over there at the park over on the waterfront. And then, going wherever we played. And I remember, I think we were playing in Streamwood or one of those places. We're playing in like either a Little League or Pony League field. And it's a tie game with the bases loaded and in the bottom of the 7th or 9th, whatever we were playing that day. And all we needed was a base hit. I'm coming up. And so Les comes up to me and goes, Dave, all we need is the hit. Don't go up there trying to hit a home run. All right, Les. Woo! Hit the walk-off grand slam. But I remember, again, that's how Les was fired up. He managed, like you said, he coached. I mean, you were talking about managers. I mean, Lee Elia would have been the perfect manager for him. But I got to know Lee my first year with the Devil Rays. Lee was outstanding and, again, laughed about that tape and laughed about that rant. But I think the biggest thing for me, David, and again, I'm going to close it out with this, is that a lot of people, like you said, when you see people in the press box, there are certain people that you kind of start to angle away maybe from every once in a while. I couldn't help but want to, say I had to always say hi to Les. And, it might take 15 minutes, it might take 20 minutes, whatever the case may be. But I had to do it, and I'm glad that these last several years we became friends on Facebook. Again, my condolences to Kathy and his son and Kathy's sons. And I think the thing that I'm going to hold near and dear to me here over the last moments now is the fact that I saw there was something other than sports for Les. I saw him going and taking the pictures at Maggiano's. I saw the pictures in Cancun and Honolulu that he was just talking about just days ago, when the bad weather hit Chicago, and he was, reminiscing about how nice the weather was. Yeah. There was more than just sports to Les Grobstein, and I think I'm going to hold that near and dear to my heart. But again, he was a guy I wanted to be. He was a guy that I worked with, a guy that, again, I became friends with. And, I love Les Grobstein. I really, really do. You'll never hear me ever say a bad thing about Les Grobstein. And to close this out, if indeed there is a moment of silence or anything for Les in any one of these sporting events here over the next few days, and I hope there is in Chicago because it's deservedly so, I could just picture Les Grobstein standing next to you, though, while the moment of silence is going on in Beavis and Butthead mode saying something about it. I really, really could. Like, why are they doing this for this guy? But God bless Les, and God bless you guys. I loved, again, the thing you did with George yesterday. Bruce Levine did a great tribute. There's been some really, 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 Paul Sullivan did one. There's been some great tributes to Les, and deservedly so.
Hey, Dave, I miss you also up here in Chicago. I know you come back. I'll see you in April when the Rays are in town.
Plan, my friend. Thanks again for having me.
Thanks for having me, coming on, Dave. All right, let's go now to also a very good friend of mine. Let's bring in Mark Silverman from ESPN 1000. Hey, Mark, thanks for doing this tonight. Appreciate it.
Shu, it's great to talk to you, and it's a shame now the last two times that I've seen you in person at JD's funeral, and now for this podcast that I did not think that you would be doing anytime soon. That's for sure. I thought he would live forever, right?
100%. I mean, I find it hard to believe. I mean, I would call Les even during COVID, Mark, once or twice a week, even though we're not going to games as much, if at all, I would still get on the phone with Les to talk about something. And it's just really, really hard to believe. Of all people, I thought, I've said this a couple of times already the last couple of days. It took the Cubs 108 years to win the championship. If it took them another 108 years, I was guaranteed that Les would still be there.
Yeah.
So it's just shocking that it's just shocking.
Yeah. And look, listening to all you guys is the way I started, right? I mean, I've been fortunate to work with you for a lot of years. Guys like Bruce Levine. We had George on the station today. Guys who have been in this business so long, who I admired, who I listened to. Les Grobstein was that. I mean, I was telling this story with Fred Hubner recently because he retired. And that 976-1313 number got me in trouble. Like it was pay dirt for me because I just wanted to hear sportscasting and I wanted to hear the scores because back in the day, that's really all you can get in unless you waited for the news or you got the newspaper the next day. But for my parents, they always used to say it's a toll call. So like I would listen to Les back then. I would listen to Les with Stephen Gary. My parents would send me tapes down from the old Luke days and everything from all those great shows. And then, to 1995, the story I always tell when I'm interning for GN and I'm just trying to get in the business. And for those who don't know, look, it's a tough business, Shu. You've been around. You've run into some jerks along the way, and it could be very territorial. And you're 23 years old, and you want this so badly, and you've had this dream that you just want to be a sportscaster to do what all these other voices that you've heard on the radio and through sports phone and everything that you want to do. And one of the nicest guys there is the guy who's probably done it the longest. You know what I mean? And there were a lot of guys who didn't want this 23-year-old punk anywhere near them. And I think Bruce wrote it. Sure enough, he's like, hey, who are you? Great to meet you. I'm Les Grobstein. And then sure enough, after a year, I'm on the beat. I'm sitting up with Les Grobstein, Seattle, between NBA Finals games. And Les says, let's go have a dinner on top the Space Needle. So here I am, my first NBA Finals I'm ever covering. And the floor is turning as we get the in the round view of Seattle. And I'm having dinner with the Grobber before the Bulls win their 4th championship.
That's, you know what, Mark, that's one of the things that I've always noticed and admired about Les, is something that you just touched on. Les was always kind to anybody. I mean, he was not threatened by anybody in this industry. And we both know that there's a threat always, like looking over your shoulder, who's going to take my job. Les never worried about that. Les was his own persona. It didn't make a difference if he was at Sports Phone or 1000 or at LS or at The Score. He was always the same, always the same.
And I think too, he always wanted a new audience, because I think when he would repeat that same story,
right,
in the Wrigley press box, you and Bruce and Georgie would look at him and say, Les, we know, we've heard that story 10 times. But when he's got some fresh blood like me in Seattle, I'm like, ooh, really? Okay. And or like we'd be at a baseball game and I said this today on the air, that the thing we remember most as sports fans is when we go to these memorable games, whether it's as a fan or what we do as reporters, is you always remember sort of who you were with. You remember the great games, but then you're like, okay, who was I with? And I always go back to the 16 World Series, sitting there with Carmen DeFalco, Danny Zetterman, Waddle, got a million stories. Some of the greatest sporting events ever, I had a next seat view with Les Grobstein for those 95 to 98 Bulls, whether we were in Salt Lake City, whether we were in Seattle, whether we're sitting at the United Center, no matter what. And then whenever there would be a boring game, you would know this, Shu. Every now and then he would pull out one of the tapes that he had stashed. He was listen to Earl Weaver.
Oh God.
He would play the greatest hits of the rants. And it was like walking with a museum or listening to someone from a museum.
I just got to follow up on what you're saying, because you said 10 times. It was more than like 100 times. He would practice his radio show in the press box on all of us. And I go, Les, I've heard that one so many times. And the tape that you're talking about, I think that cassette tape finally snapped once and for all.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't find it the last time I asked him. It had, the rant with Jerome Holtzman and Ralph Garr. It had Tommy Lasorda and Dave Kingman and certainly Lee Elia. And he would just pull out those rants. And he also had on his tape the Woody Woodpecker. And I go, Les, shut that up. So, yeah, I mean, I'm going to say this 1,000 times forever. He was one of a kind, but is a person who I will never forget. But I also will never forget, Mark, because when my father passed away, and Shivas are a hard thing. I didn't even want to be at more than one Shiva for my dad, but he came twice. He came twice to my father's Shiva, and I'll never forget that. Never.
Very, very kind. And like that's how I summed it up is Les Grobstein is one of a kind, and he's as kind as they come.
Absolutely.
I think it's a good way to sum it up.
Absolutely. Hey, Mark, appreciate you taking some time tonight. Continued good health. I hope to see you sometime real soon.
And always great to talk to you, Shu, and thanks for everything that you've done for me and all the great reporters out there who, have grown up through the ranks. Guys like, I said this to George today, guys like, and I worked really close with you, Shu, guys like you, guys like Bruce, a lot of Czech Kopic back in the day, all the guys who have been around so long and have done amazing work. The way you guys treated people like me, it will never be forgotten.
I just got to add this while you're here, Mark. And Bruce will be on in a couple of seconds. The favorite thing of all the things that I've ever done, and I thought it was one of the best things we ever did, is when we did that 1 hour reporter show. You covered the Bears, Bruce covered baseball, I covered the Bulls. We would go round table at the old AM 1000. It was one of the most fun and I thought best things that I've ever been part of.
Fred Hoiberg came when he was a player one time. We used to do it at the old McCormick Place,
right?
Whatever. And then a story for another day that you need to tell when we're all around and we're not remembering people when they're gone is we need to talk about those conference calls back in the day with Mitch Rosen, and he would pit me against you, against Bruce, against everybody to see who read the paper the most that day and who knew their beat the most that day.
We'll tell those stories off the air. How about that?
All right, Shu.
Hey, Mark, thanks a lot. I hope to see you soon.
All right. You too.
Okay. All right. Let's go now to, honestly, Les loved sports like no other. There's no question about that. But he finally found something in life that he loved more than sports. And that was his longtime partner, Kathy. And Kathy, thank you so much for being here. I'm sure you've heard a lot of the stories while you were on hold here. There's still more still to come. But I wanted to get you on as well because, listen, you knew Les better than anybody, to be perfectly blunt.
I did. I appreciate you and your friendship. I am so thankful you're doing this. I am so shocked on the fans and the love he's gotten. If he only knew that there was tons of people in every state. And I heard even Canada today. I'm going to miss him terribly. And I know many names he talked about, and I learned a lot from him. And also he gave me so many funny stories and my children, and he was great to us.
Oh, there's no question. You know what, Kathy, and when I filled in when Les and you were on vacation, and I think sometimes it was as far away as Hawaii, I go, Les, if you want to, because as he knew and also, come 3 a.m, when doing that overnight show, all those calls just sort of dissipate and disappear, and it's sort of tough. And I go, Les, if you really want to check in, and oh yeah, I'll check in, probably to your detriment, I'll be honest with you.
I did.
Yeah, he would check in. It was probably like 10 o'clock in Hawaii. It was 3 a.m. in Chicago. He would check in and he'd want to, what's going on? I want to talk about sports, yada, yada, yada. And then, he would always take pictures of you like at the swimming pool or the swim up bar or whatever. And I got to be honest with you, a lot of times he was in those like ugly swim trunks. I'll be honest with you.
Matching top too.
Yeah. And those ugly Hawaiian top shirts. And people would back at the station would post those pictures as the screenshots on all the computers throughout the station. I got to be honest with you, it was hysterical. But you know what? It was easy to make fun of Les, but he took it. I mean, he took it very kind-naturedly, if you will. I mean, he didn't have a mean. I don't have to tell you this. He didn't have a mean bone in his body. He just really did not.
No, we got along really well. And when I had first met him, he told me who he was, and I'm like, I don't know you. I don't know your name. It doesn't sound familiar. Anyways, he asked me the second day he saw me if I wanted to go to Cub spring training. I didn't know him that well. And I said, okay. So I found sitters and I went, and I was starting to learn a little bit more about sports. I was not big into sports, and I had him draw me stuff like for baseball and draw, the directions on like shortstop and all that. And I didn't know anything, but now I know more than I ever have. I know names. I got to meet famous people, Ron Santo, his family, Ernie Banks, just tons of people I met. I could keep going on and on.
Kathy, you spoke of spring training, and I remember when he took you out there, and I think it was more than once, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, yeah.
And he took you to Don and Charlie's one night, which
Always.
is the famous restaurant that, if you're out in spring training in Arizona and Scottsdale, you have to go to Don and Charlie's. It's Don Carson. And that's where it's a who's who. You meet everybody in the sports baseball world, whether it's players or GMs or, media people. And I know he was proud. I mean, proud to show you off to everybody there. I know that firsthand, Kathy.
I know. He was amazing. And if I ever really wanted to meet someone particular, like I wanted to always meet Eddie and Jobo, because I grew up with listening, and he made that happen. And I was like, are you kidding me? And I got to sit in press box, the unbelievable things I was able to do. And I thank him in my heart. I'm hurting, and it's going to take time for healing, but I was one lucky person, and my kids were. He was good to them. And my kids do not like sports, and Les would try to brainwash them and talk to them, but it didn't work as well. But he did always play oldies for my kids,
Right.
and they didn't like that either. And he would sing to them. So I just wanted to tell you that, it was fun.
My God, that is one thing I'm going to be honest with you. I never heard Les sing, and unless you have it on some tape somewhere, I probably never will. But
he used to sing in the car all the time. I'm like, oh my God, you're not your son.
Okay.
His son is a really good singer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, Kathy, God bless you. Treasure his memories. I know we all will. And I'll talk to you later tomorrow. And then, of course, I'll see you on Thursday.
Thank you for all you do. Thank you for your friendship. And I hope you stay in touch with me, because I'm going to need you in my life. And everyone who has reached out to me, thank you. I got so much love, and I feel like I made more friends. Thank you.
All right, Kathy, thank you. And promise we will be there for you. Kathy, thank you so much. All right, let's go now to another longtime friend of both myself and Les, Chris Bowden. Chris, you were also shoulder to shoulder, many years, many venues with myself and with Les. I'm sure you got some good stories too.
Yeah, and tough act to follow with Kathy, but I'm honored to do that, and all of us are thinking about her. And as you and many others have said here, before I get the chance to jump on, I'm so glad that he found somebody. We always associated Les with always being at an event, always being at a stadium, a ballpark, an arena, covering something. And the fact that, through social media over the last few years, obviously he's been with Kathy for quite some time and established himself a nice little life outside of the ballpark, outside of the arena. So I am happy he's had the opportunity to do that. And to be quite honest, I haven't seen Les a whole lot over the course of the last 15 years or so, because with the jobs that I've had, I've kind of married myself to a studio, and I haven't been out in the field. But the last time I did see Les was Thanksgiving weekend when Northwestern played Purdue. And, I'm sitting there trying to get some last minute notes. I happen to be in the dining room at Wrigley Field. So I sit myself down, and then Les comes in, and I said, I'm not going to get any work done here. I'm not going to be getting any background on any of these teams right here. But by the same token, I knew I was in for a conversation, and I was happy to see him. And all of a sudden, a conversation evolved into Rick Venturi when he coached Northwestern, and Francis Pay and Dennis Green. And he brought that encyclopedia brain of his out, and he talked about all the other football games that he covered during his career at Wrigley Field. But you and everybody else has said it too. We all would have our moments when we, poke fun at Les because he was Les. But by the same token, he could take it. And, there was no bigger heart in any of the press boxes around town than Les Grobstein. And, I mentioned this on the air last night with Espo. David, when you and I were coming up and trying to make a name for ourselves and trying to get into the business, Les was almost kind of like the prototype, the template of what we wanted to be. Chicago people who wanted to be on the air in Chicago. And he got on the air pretty quick after graduating from Columbia College, and was at a big time station and had a big time role in that over at LS. I know he did a couple of other things prior to that, but the fact that you and I were lugging it over at Sports Phone, following in Les's footsteps, and the fact that he got one of these big time jobs in town, that's what all of us were striving to do. Right. And so he kind of blazed a trail for all of us to try and follow. And good on him that he was able to do it. And he managed to find himself some great gigs, and a lot of times he was the foil for the Lou Jacks and the Edwards and the Kevin Matthews and the Stephen Garys. But by the same token, he always did his job. He was a grinder, a Chicagoan through and through. And it was funny. When we were doing our retirement thing with Fred, I mentioned my first road trip as a reporter was Super Bowl 20 in New Orleans. And that just happened to be during that week where Les all of a sudden got in the middle of the spotlight with the Buddy DiLiberto, Jim McMahon story. And all of a sudden, Les, who would have thought Les is in the centerpiece of Super Bowl week as it's going on. So all of a sudden everybody's interviewing Les Grobstein. The tables were turned. So that was hilarious in itself. And it kind of taught me, all right, if you're doing your job, be ready for anything. All of a sudden the tables might be turned and you might be in the spotlight. So I love the guy. I wish we would have crossed paths a whole lot more in recent years, but I'm glad I had the chance to sit down and chat with him at that Northwestern game. And we're all going to miss him. We're all going to miss him greatly. And we're all thinking of Kathy and his son and all the family members too.
And real quickly, Chris, you mentioned Northwestern a couple of times, and I thought one of the coolest things, I guess, for lack of a better term, that I've read over the last couple of days was Pat Fitzgerald, who, of course, is coaching Northwestern, and he was a player and grew up in the area, of course, and all that. And Pat Fitzgerald said, in talking about Les, and he probably said this on one of the radio stations over the last couple of days, Les was at every stage of my development, growing up. Player at Northwestern, coach at Northwestern, going to the Rose Bowl, what have you, that Les was always a staple. And that's why this is so hard to fathom, because Les was always at every staple along the way. And it's just hard to believe that he won't be in future staples going forward. That's the hardest part for a lot of us to comprehend here.
Yeah, and I'm certainly hoping that Chicago sports teams did themselves proud with the way they took a moment to recognize Jeff Dickerson a couple of weeks ago. And I would imagine they'll be doing the same for Les, because none of these places are going to be the same without seeing Les packing his suitcase or packing his bag with a couple extra bags of chips or whatever it may be, or a media guide or anything like that. But by the same token, I think, when we were sitting next to the breath, I don't know if Les ever made me laugh. It was more like an eye roll whenever he would try to tell a joke or try to be funny.
Yeah, he wasn't funny.
Yeah. All right, Les. Okay. Yeah, we, like you and Dave were saying, we've heard these stories before. But by the same token, those press boxes wouldn't be the same without him, and they won't be the same here moving forward.
Chris, thank you so much for taking the time tonight. I miss you as well. I miss everybody, because, during this whole COVID the last 2 years, we don't get as much of a chance, but hopefully this will pass and we can all go out and if nothing else, have a drink to Les's memory.
Here. And thank you for doing this. It's
a good thing. Thanks, Chris. Much appreciated. Let's bring in another longtime friend of both Les and myself, shoulder to shoulder, press boxes over all these years. Bruce Levine. Hey, Bruce. Oh, you're wearing your old Crass shirt. That's great.
This is in honor of our dear friend Les Grobstein. And certainly we talked about, you and Wilsey and Fred Mitchell talked about softball games. And I just have to relate to everybody out there that softball game we talked about, the radio against, or the electronic media against the print media, was going on for about 3 years before Joe Muschel turned around to then PR director of the Cubs, Sharon Panazzo, who was umpiring, and said some unfortunate words. And those games were eliminated after that. But Les, in one of those games, as you said, broke his ankle, okay? And you and Fred talked about it. And the incomplete part of that story is that Les's dad came and picked him up, took him to Northwestern Hospital. They got him in a cast. They gave him crutches, and Les was back for the post game to do the post game of the Cub game. Okay, that is Les Grobstein in a nutshell. Okay, nothing ever stopped Les Grobstein. Nothing ever would, and I don't think death on this planet will stop the comet that we knew was Les Grobstein. He will continue on forever, and in our memories as well as in all the fans that he, we haven't talked much about how he was the voice of the third shift, how he was the voice of the fan, how he was just as polite and just as great a guy to some poor guy that was calling in that was having a rough night at 3 a.m. talking to him about anything just to get through the night. And Les was always there for him. And the humility, the humanity of Les Grobstein, I think, is the first thing I always think of. Talking about young reporters coming into the press box, Les was always there for them, as most of these stars like Dave Wills and all these people like Steve Ogan and people that had tremendous careers and still continue to have tremendous careers talked about. Les was a star before any of us. He was a star radio person. I mean, you worked hand in hand with him and George, but Les went on to great things. He was the sports director at WLS for 10 years. When he did that, he managed to find a budget to travel to every place in the world and cover every event. And look at this shirt. It says Crash, Chicago Radio All-Stars, okay? On the shoulder, like Dave Wills said, sponsored by Midway Airlines. Les basically owned Midway Airlines for many years. We talk about Kathy. We talk about her boys. Les got it right the fourth time. He found the most wonderful woman in the world. No, he never loved anybody in the world more than he loved Kathy and the boys, and that's a fact. I asked him about marriage. I said, have you been married? He said, he took 3 swings. He said, I swing and a miss 3 times. I got a wonderful son, Scott, out of it. It was worth it all. He's the love of my life. And I said, well, what do you think about marriage? He said, I'll tell you this. I'll ask you this, Bruce. Are you married or are you happy? Okay, that was Les's favorite line. But he hit a homer. He hit a grand slam with Kathy, and she deserves to be honored on this as well as Les, because Les was never happier in his whole life than the last 20 years.
You couldn't be more right about that. Everything you said, of course, Bruce, and especially that last part. And he was not going after Zsa Zsa Gabor's all-time record of 8. He just said 3 is enough. And what's the point at that point being married? He was basically married to Kathy as is, and they were so happy with each other. And I mean, again, other than sports, that was absolutely his absolute passion. And whenever we were out anywhere, that's who Les always was talking to and wanted to talk to.
All right, David, it's your turn, okay? It's your turn to tell your favorite Les Grobstein story or stories. Your dime, your dance floor, buddy.
Thank you, Chet. All right, I'll give you one for sure. I might save for a few later on. Let me just think of one real quickly. Okay, actually, one of my favorite stories. And I think Tommy Edwards is in the background here, so he might have been on the air with Tommy. I'm not really sure. I know he was working at LS at the time, and it was after a Cubs game, and we were on our way to play a crass softball game. I don't know where, Schaumburg or Wheeling, who the heck knows. And he was on it, I think, 5:05. The game ended at about 4:30, and we're on our way. We're never going to make it to the game there. And I think this is even before we even had cell phones. So he had to pull over. He pulled into a gas station somewhere on the northwest side of the city. Okay. And he goes on a payphone. That's when folks, for people who don't know, there were phones that you actually put money in to pay. He put the quarter or whatever in, and I'm sitting in the car waiting for him to finish because I want to get to the damn game already. And he's on, and I'm listening on the car radio, and he comes on, and all of a sudden, in the old days at gas stations, people would come in and they would go over that little thing on the ground, and it would go ding, 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 ding. And whether it was Tommy or whoever else, and Tommy will verify this when he comes on in a couple of minutes, whether it was Tommy or somebody else, they go, Les, what is that? Where are you? Oh. I mean, his quick thinking now, he goes, I'm right outside Wrigley Field, okay? I had to find a phone right outside Wrigley Field. Yeah, but what's that ding, 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 Les? What is that? And I'm sitting on the floor of the car. I'm laughing so hard I thought I was going to pee in my pants. And he goes, quick mind here. He goes, that's the 22 Clark Street bus that just went by. So, presence of mind to at least know that the number of the bus on Clark Street is 22, which it is. And I mean, I don't know if whoever was back in the studio, Tommy or otherwise, fell for that. I doubt it. They knew that he wasn't at the ballpark at that point. And that's just one of many stories. I traveled with Les. I drove with him, as did you, Bruce. It was a white knuckle experience every time you were in a car with him, every time.
David, he was the first multitask driver, okay? Because I never knew that someone could drive with their knees. But you and I, he could talk in the phone. He could be doing an update, driving with his knees, a Coke in one hand and the cell phone in the other. And I'm telling you the truth. He drove with his knees. It's amazing that any of us survived all that, but Les was truly the most unique and amazing person that I've ever met. And he will forever be in my heart, as he will for so many of us. And again, I don't believe Les is dead. I just believe that he is doing his shtick somewhere else right now.
Well, heaven's got a talker up there. I can guarantee you that. He's doing his show there like he's done everywhere else over all these years. I guarantee it. Hey, Bruce, I'll see you over the next couple of days, I'm sure. Thanks for joining us. Greatly appreciate it.
David, it's such a pleasure to be able to talk about one of the most wonderful, big-hearted guys and we don't talk about this enough, so much talent and so much ability to relate to Chicago fans the way that no one else has ever done.
Thanks again, Bruce. I'll see you over the next couple of days.
Thanks for doing this.
Sure thing. Absolutely. Let's bring in now John Greenberg from The Athletic. John, also in these press boxes over all these many years. And John, I know you're probably amused by most, if not all, the stories that you've heard while you've been on hold here. And I'm sure you got a ton of your own.
Well, I had to mute Sylvie for a little bit. I've heard Sylvie's stories. Sylvie's turned into the new Grobber. We've heard his stories 1,000 times. No, I'm just kidding. No, I love these stories. You know that. And, I've written about Les a number of times. And, I respected him. And I was entertained by him. And, like you said, we always like to say we're never, there'll never be another Les. But, he was literally, the only Les anyway. There wasn't anyone before him.
No question about that. You write for a living. You not only write about, the teams, but you write about the people who cover sports, John. And I've always been enthralled with a lot of your writing about, a lot of people in the business. If you had to, and you have written a story or two about Les over the years, but how would you sum them up?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, because we all reuse the words, right? We all use unique, one of a kind. Like, it's become a cliche to describe Les like that. Here's what I would say about Les. No one named Les, his name and him fit perfectly. Like if I were to tell someone who didn't know Les and say, sketch me what Les Grobstein looks like, they would probably draw Les. He is Les Grobstein. You know, I have a friend who worked with Adam Sandler for a long time as his writer, a buddy of mine from Chicago. And I met Sandler on like the set of one of the movies he does. I really wanted to pitch him a movie where Sandler plays Grobber. Because that would be like wouldn't that fit perfectly? Like Sandler.
Let me think. The Water Boy. Actually, he might have patterned it after the movie The Water Boy.
I think like several of his Netflix characters are also patterned after Les, with like the voice and everything like that. But you know, I've written about Les like 3 times, I think 4 times now, which is crazy.
Right.
But I've also written about the vendors of Chicago. And Les reminds me of some of these vendors, some of the old Jewish guys who have been who vended for 40, 50 years, like Lloyd Rutsky,
right?
You know, and guys like that. I think there's something about that which I think appeals to me. In like, I wish I was smart enough to really like write this well, but like, you know, just the older Jewish guys who come from the neighborhood and love sports and are a little quirky. And I think there's something to that. And I think that's what makes me like, you know, enjoy Les so much. He's like, I think everyone probably had like an uncle or like, you know, a grandparent or a father like Les at some point.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And you're right about, I mean, that's a great analogy. I didn't think about that until you actually said it. Les knew a lot of those vendors because honestly, he went to high school with a lot of those vendors. Les went to Von Steuben, and I know a couple of the vendors either went to Mather or Von Steuben or somewhere on the north or northwest side of the city. So he knew all those guys and they knew him.
Absolutely. Everyone knew Les. And you know what's amazing to think about, right? Like, you know, we all think of it as kind of like a big little city, right? Like once you get in your niche, and I'm sure it's like this in New York with people who cover sports, you know, Madison Square Garden, United Center, Wrigley Field, to outsiders, it must seem like this, you know, foreboding, like impersonal place. But for us, it becomes so small. You know, the security guards, right? You know, the ticket takers, you get to know everyone. And to me, it's kind of amazing that Les, this eccentric character, became so well known in a city as big as Chicago. I mean, you've covered all these people too, so I'm not saying you're, you know, but like, you know, like you see Les in the back of a picture of the Bulls celebrating in the locker room, right? Like you know, he's the one that taped Lee Elia. He's done all this stuff. Like, you know, so like, it's, you know, it's very Forrest Gump, very Z-League. You know what I mean? Like he's just been everywhere. I think that's an amazing thing to think about.
Les actually he had a little bit of publicity hound in him, to be perfectly honest with you. That's why he would get in that picture, like you said, when the Bulls won that first championship. Les snuck his way into that picture in the shower. Now, they weren't actually naked in the shower, but they were just, you know, like throwing water or whatever all over themselves in that area. And he stuck his head in there just like this to make sure his picture got in there. And I don't know, you know, Johnny, again, it's been so fun to do this tonight. But it's also sad because he won't be there going forward, but he'll always be in our minds and our hearts, and that's really what counts.
Yeah, and you know, the thing you think about, like, yes, this is fun. We're all remembering him, and we're all, you know, eulogizing him. But like, it's going to be weird getting in your car at like midnight, and you want to hear that theme song come on, and you want to hear Les. And I used to love it when I'd be driving home, and I would have just seen you like 20 minutes ago, and then you and I are driving home at the same time, and then you're calling in. And you and Les you're either giving them the business or you guys are just like, just having fun remembering stuff. Like just, you know, just chatting about the old days. So I'm going to miss that stuff, you know, and I'm writing a little column trying to handicap who's going to take Les's place. No one can, but like, that'll be interesting.
Because and I got to say this also, because you made mention of it. I mean, his open or his close on the show, I always said this was the best because a combination of the Rolling Stones and the Three Stooges. Does it get any better of a mix than that?
No. And like, I love that. It's such a great song for one thing, for an open, but like it gets you a little like you're happy. Like you're in the car, you're listening to the radio. Like, I don't know. To me, that was just so exciting. It was just so happy. I got to call in. I never call in. But I did this one time because I was stuck in traffic on the way home from a Cubs Brewers game this season. There was some kind of construction going on around Gurnee. And I'm listening. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to call in. I'm sitting here. I'm stopped. And so I called in on the way. It was one of those games that it was right when the Cubs started their slide that ended their, you know, this whole core. And so I called in and they were so happy to have someone calling in and talking that's not a lunatic. And, I just had a great conversation with him at 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah, you mentioned coming back from Milwaukee. I'll tell one real last quick story while you're on here. I'm coming back with him from Milwaukee. It's probably Green Bay. We were coming from a Bears Green Bay game. I think it was December. The roads are snowy, yada yada yada. Coming back, and there was a huge backup, like 2-mile backup, because they were doing construction in a snowstorm or something. And if you stayed where you were, it was going to be an hour backup, no doubt. Well, the rules of the road do not apply when Les Grobstein's behind the wheel. He makes his own rules, and the road is his. He went on the shoulder. He went beyond the shoulder. I think he was driving on I don't know what he was driving on, a corn patch for all I know. And I will give him this. He got us through there a lot quicker than it would have been if we waited that hour for everybody to clear out. So getting in a car with him. And by the way, he would have been the best Chicago cab driver ever because he knew every shortcut. He knew every alley in Chicago. I don't know how he did, but he did.
That's a great point. He really would have been like a cab driver in a movie. Like that's what he would have been. I'm just happy that, it's not just us talking about it. You see all the people calling into the shows and sharing tweets and, commenting on stories. It's nice that he's getting his due. I obviously wish he was around to hear himself I wish he just retired.
Yeah, so do I. I told him that for years and years, honestly, Johnny. I said, it's great that you're the voice of, the third shift and everything, but you know what? At some juncture, give it up and enjoy the rest of your life. And unfortunately, this happened before he was able to do that. So that's the sad part here. But yeah, he would have loved all this. We're talking about him. He would have loved this, Johnny.
Loved it. Absolutely, like you said, total self promoter.
Yeah.
I'm just happy I got to know him and I got to write about him. And I'm glad you guys, are doing all this stuff.
Thanks, Johnny. Hey, much appreciated. I'll see you sometime real soon too.
All right, see you later.
Thanks, John. All right, we got one last person to get into, and it's Tommy Edwards. And Tommy, did I tell the story correctly? Were you the one when he was called in from that gas station that one time? Were you on the air?
Yeah, we heard, and of course the engineer was listening, and I looked into the glass, the engineer on the other side of the glass, and they're going, no, like they knew, I knew, but I thought, okay, we just go ahead and okay, Les, thanks, goodbye. But it's great seeing everybody and listening to these wonderful stories. I particularly liked hearing Kathy's personal stories of Les singing. I just can't imagine that.
And either.
Yeah, I think Fred Mitchell really said it best when he said, "You remember how people treat you," and that's the way Les was. I mean, he never treated anyone with any disrespect, and so that's one of the things that I'll always remember. I first met him in the late '70s when Bud Miller, the news director at WLS, hired him. And when I first heard him on the air, I thought it was great because before that, the news people were just given final scores and that's it. There really wasn't much of a sports report. And Les sounded like Chicago and he knew what he was talking about. And so it was really great. But being a member of the Larry Luchak Morning Show means that you're susceptible to being the target of a lot of humor from Mr. Luchak. And because I certainly went through my share. But I think, when Larry would be teasing Les, it would be so funny. That transcended onto some of the games of the 89ers. When Les would do something a little off color or whatever during a game, Larry would go on the air the next morning and publicly apologize for Les's behavior, which was just an all put up. I mean, it was no big deal, but Larry would showcase it as really something funny. I think Les made animal stories a couple of times. I think my favorite story was when Larry was telling me that a scientist come up with a pill that you feed to cattle, that when it eventually goes through the system and comes out as manure, sunlight would create something to make the manure explode and fertilize the rest of the pasture. So, I'm sitting there listening to him and I said, okay. And then he said, but I've ordered some of these pills and I'm going to stick one in Les Grobstein's hamburger and we're going to see if it really works. I don't think I laughed harder in my life when he told me that. I mean, it was really funny. But I remember.
Go ahead, Tommy.
The 89ers were something, was a major part of my life. I mean, I look back on that, and I have so many wonderful memories, and Les is a part of them. The different places we played, the money we made for charities, and the softball. We played Journey. We played Billy Joel and his road crew. We played, of course, police officers and school faculties and firefighters and all this stuff. And we had a ball. And after every game, we all would go out for beer and pizza. So we would just go into a restaurant and basically take it over. And of course, Les would be there and everything. And we had a children's table over here with just soft drinks and pizza and all this. But all of the adults would be sitting around talking about the game, talking about whatever. And then the evening would go on, and Les would be the first one to leave every evening. And we would always say, "Oh, Les, did you put any money down on the table, Les?" And he said, "Look, I don't drink, and I just had 2 slices of pizza. So that's what, $1.50 maybe?" Okay, go ahead, $1.50. Later, we found out that Les went to the owner of these restaurants and told them that he was voted player of the game, and could he get a pizza to take home with him?
Of course.
And of course, the owner would say, "Oh yeah, sure." So he was scoring on that. I was on the air the afternoon that he called on the hotline and said that he had this tape of Lee Elia going crazy in the dugout or in the press conference after a Cubs game. And he said, "Could you walk back to the news department and make sure I got an engineer there that can just edit this, because it's going to require a ton of editing." So I went back to the news department and found somebody, told him Les was on the way with some crazy tape of Lee Elia. So be prepared and be ready to edit, and you're going to have to just do it. You can't have anything else get in the way. And so they did. And of course, everybody heard the result on the air. But that was just one of the most amazing things. But on a personal level, Les and I have been pals since the late 70s. And my kids kind of grew up with Les Grobstein. When I was doing the Bulls over at the Chicago Stadium, it was my daughters. And with the United Center, it's my son. My son was a ball boy for 9 years. And he grew up listening to Les Grobstein stories, and eventually met Les as a very young kid, and found him to be exceptionally welcoming and talking sports, because my son just loves sports. And so they would talk and talk and talk, and he would, on the drive home, he would be talking about, "Hey, Dad, I spent more time talking to Les Grobstein. I couldn't believe he knew this, he knew that. He told me stories about this, and everything." And my son's 29 years old now. And I mean, he was really shook when we found out that Les had passed, and the whole family was. I mean, my daughters, my wife, and my son. And the last game that I did at the United Center for the Bulls when I retired in November of 2019, Tommy spent a lot of time with Les in the press room, just talking about sports, talking about his desire to get into sports broadcasting, and Les was giving him advice and talking to him. And my son said, "He really cares. He really cared about me." And I said, "I understand. That's the way he is."
Yeah.
That was Les Grobstein.
Absolutely. Hey, Tommy, you were the perfect cleanup hitter for tonight's podcast. I know you spent a lot of years on the air and off the air with Les, and that story about him taking the pizza home, that's a classic.
It's so typical. It's so typical.
It is so typical. But, again, kind heart, good soul. We'll all miss him. I miss you, Tommy. The Bulls games are still the Bulls games, but they're not the same without you. I miss you there.
Well, we bought the league pass, so we watch every game. We see you guys at the table.
Okay. Tommy, thanks for joining us. I really do appreciate it.
Oh, I'm glad to be here, and I really enjoyed this, David.
Thanks, Tommy. Well, I hope to see you soon. All right, that'll do it, I think, for our guest list. I want to bring in our executive producer here, Fat Mike, who we're doing on his platform. This is the 1252 Sports platform. Mike, I just wanted to bring you in because kudos to you for making the production part of this happen tonight. I'm sure you were probably amused by many, if not all, the stories tonight. You got a glimpse, but just a glimpse of Les. I'll tell a couple of last stories by myself on Les, the ones that I can at least tell. And let's see if I can think of one. Yeah, there was, let's see. Well, I mean, when I traveled with Les, when we were out of town and he would do his overnight show, let's just say I was at the Blackhawks Stanley Cup Series in either Philadelphia or maybe in Boston, or maybe I was with on the Cubs in the road in San Francisco or wherever else. Les would still do his overnight show. I mean, he was doing it on the Score, obviously. Now, he traveled. I don't think he paid a penny because he had frequent flyer miles. This guy just knew every angle how to, fly for next to nothing, if not nothing. Anyway, he would be out there, but he wouldn't pay for any rooms. So Les would do his overnight show. He would figure out a way of tapping into a phone line in the business center and the fax machine or the copy machine. That was his first chore of duty when he got out to all these places. And I don't know how he did it sometimes. He got on the air like a minute before midnight. He was like MacGyver. He just figured it out. He pulled off the impossible. Anyway, so Les would do a show. I'd probably go upstairs after having a couple drinks in the bar and then passing out. And then Les would knock on the door at about 5:15 after the show was over or whatever time it was. And then, I'd sort of groggily wake up and open the door, and then Les would go pass out either on the floor or a couch or whatever. So again, he traveled around the country. He wanted to be part of everything. He was on the air, yada, 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 yet never paid a penny. He just had this incredible knack of never paying a penny. And there are just so many other stories. I mean, again, driving with Les. I mean, normally from Chicago to Indianapolis was, 2 hours, 45 minutes. Not with Les. You can take about half that time off and oh my God, he would find shortcuts that I just didn't know existed driving through the city. It's just truly amazing. All the many, many, many stories with Les. He's just an unforgettable person. And I still, even saying that, I still can't believe, Mike, that he's gone.
Right. Les was a great guy, and tonight's show goes to show that everybody who came out here tonight had nothing but amazing and wonderful and super nice things to say about Les. I spent a brief little time with Les here when you guys were doing your podcast here and stuff like that. It was some of the funniest moments I've ever had in my life, trying to set up his computer and stuff like that. He doesn't know what's going on. He's ready to touchdown spike the thing. It was some of the funniest stuff. And then when he would get it right, he'd be this close to the computer screen. It was so funny. It was so funny. He's like, "Can you guys hear me? Now we can't see you, Les. Can you hear me? We can hear you fine, Les. We just can't see you." Then you'd be able to see him. Then you'd be able to see him. But wouldn't be able to hear him. Yeah. I was like, oh my goodness, what's going on here?
It was a combination of things. And, for a guy who honestly became a giant in the sports industry. And listen, one thing that I learned, and I'm not the most technically oriented person either, but, after a while, you just figure things out. And you just keep up with the times, So I went from a reel to reel to a cassette deck to what was called a mini disc back in the day to now different forms of digital audio equipment. But Les still had that same Marantz recorder over all these years, and he had that same microphone. And one last story that I'll tell here, Mike, and many more will come to my mind afterwards. That microphone, which he had in Lee Helia's face, Paul Konerko was enthralled with the whole, the tape of everything and the microphone. I don't know why. So Konerko wanted that microphone for his own, and Les wasn't going to Sox games, at Paul's tail end of his career. So, I told Les, I go, Les, Paul wants that microphone. Really? How much can we get for it? I go, I don't know. Seriously? How much can we get for it? How much can you get for it, rather? I don't know. He goes, well, negotiate with them. See if we can get a good price for that. So, I went to Paulie a couple of times. It never came to pass, for better or for worse, to be honest with you. But, it's unbelievable. He was so enthralled with that tape, and he wanted that microphone. And probably to this day, he probably still does. So, I mean, there's a million more stories about Les that'll still come out over the next couple of days. But I prefaced and I'll conclude that Les, again, had a kind heart and a gentle soul. He was out of Ripley's, believe it or not, in so many ways. He just was. But the thing I'll always remember, he would give you a shirt off his back. And I think one of the things that came through from almost everybody who was on tonight, that he would go out of his way to help people. And in this industry, I mean, maybe in all industries, but this one specifically, you don't always find helping people with the up and comers. You just don't. And people are always scared looking over their shoulder, who's going to take my job, stuff like that. But Les never was worried about that. He always helped everybody out. And that was just part of his heart and his soul.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed that right on the head. I mean, right on the head. He was always nice to me. With the very first time I talked to him, the very first time you introduced me to him, he was like, "Oh, hey, Fat Mike," you know, and in his Les Grobstein voice, you know, "Why do they call you Fat Mike?" Well, come on, Les. We know why they call me Fat Mike. You know, it's like, really, but it was like just that funny question that I think it was his kind of way of trying to make a joke that was like, really, you know. He's great, and I know I'm gonna miss him for sure, definitely.
Yeah, so will everybody else. Hey, Mike, appreciate you technically putting this together. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope everybody who listened and viewed this tonight enjoyed it. We'll have copies of this, you know, both video and audio over the next couple of days for people who weren't able to do it. Anyway, I hope people enjoyed it, and it was a labor of love for me specifically to do this tonight.
It was excellent. It was fantastic. Dave, I'm going to let you close out the night, and I'm going to drop out.
All right. Again, thanks to Mike. Thanks to everybody who joined us. I can't remember even at this juncture, but it was a who's who. There were a couple of people who texted me who wanted to come on, but whether technically or other reasons weren't able to go on. But I think you saw the outpouring of love here for Les Grobstein. He will never, ever be forgotten. I know I'll always treasure all my memories with him. He'll always be there. And again, I bonded with Les for so many ways, but Les and I were both one of the biggest Three Stooges fans. So we would recite line after line after line with each other about the Three Stooges. We're juvenile as all heck, but who cares? I mean, the Three Stooges is just a staple in both our lives amongst so many other things. Anyway, thanks for listening. Thanks for viewing this. I hope you had a good time. I know I did. And I'll talk to you again shortly down the road. Thanks tonight, and good night, everybody.